Thank you so much for joining us. Happy Monday, but thank you for joining us for the appraisal packet training. This is actually a training and it's something that I was taught by Chad Taylor many years ago, early in my career, and it was incredibly helpful. So as we all know, appraisals are like one of the final hurdles in the transaction. And so one of the things that was really helpful in that was coming up with an appraisal packet. So we're going to talk about that in just a moment. I'm going to go through some quick tips and tidbits about appraisals. First and foremost, I think it's incredibly important for you to meet the appraiser there. So there are times where appraisers will say, hey, I saw the house was vacant. Can't I just swing by? I've got an iBox key. I can let myself in. And I often would say, yeah, I really would prefer that I meet you there. And if you can I can give you a window if you'd like, or if you want to give me a window and just give me 20 minutes heads up, I'm happy to be flexible. But I had told my sellers I'd meet you there, and I'm happy to stay out of your way. But it's super important for you to make sure that you meet the appraiser at the house. And some of the reasons that that's important is to make sure that it's the appraiser that's showing up. There are times, and there are appraisers where they have sent out an apprentice to the appraisal appointment. And had you not been there, you wouldn't know that. Another reason is it's an added service to your sellers. I have been to an appraisal before where it was at basically 75th and Metcalf. I mean, it wasn't but like a block off of that, super easy to find. And the appraiser said, oh man, I had a real trouble finding this place. And to me, that's a huge red flag that you don't know the area. And so in that appointment, I did a lot more hand holding, and I did a lot more of saying, hey, and I was so grateful I had my packet to give them. There's another time where I sold a house for a record in a neighborhood, and I showed up and the appraiser said, oh man, I'm new. I'm actually kind of somewhat still in training. This is only like the fourth one I've done. And so I was able to very much so help be more active in that process. And that's another reason that I think it's important that you show up to that appraisal appointment. Oftentimes appraisers also are going to give you some feedback on if, hey, I'm struggling, Elizabeth, to find comps that support this one. You build relationships with appraisers, and there's often times where they'll say, hey, Elizabeth, you don't need to worry. This one's like a slam dunk. I already ran my comps and such, and it looks like it's in the right condition. We're in good shape. And you're getting that feedback real time when you're there. There's other times where they'll say, I haven't run any comps yet or whatnot, but I'll give you a heads up. Another reason it's important that you attend that appraisal appointment. If it's FHA, if it's VA, sometimes there might be appraisal requirements. And so if it's FHA, I will tell you guys, there's times where they're going to call out a railing that's missing. If you get to know at that appraisal appointment that you need to add some kind of a rinky-dink railing, it doesn't have to be pretty. There's no requirements for it to be pretty. But if you find out at the appraisal appointment that needs to be added, you and your sellers can go ahead and start getting someone out there to add that railing or do whatever it is you need to do, rather than waiting for the appraisal to come back from the lender and then start getting contractors in place and start to do that work. Does that make sense? Okay, do you have a question, Emily?
Yeah. So you do appraisals for both sellers and buyers?
You only attend when it's in the past, traditionally, it's only been in attendance when you're the seller, the listing agent. Now, I have heard buyer's agents have been attending some appraisals. There's a few that are really aggressive agents that do attend because they're anxious about it. But most traditionally, it is the listing agent that would attend the appraisal appointment. But if that makes sense too, you're getting a head start on what those requirements might be if there are requirements. And most of the time they are going to tell you, hey, Elizabeth, I saw that, this step here, we've got some wood rot here that we're going to need to replace, especially if you're there and you're professional and you're friendly. Most of them are going to give you a heads up. The other thing that happens with FHA and VA, and it's not a guarantee, and I'm not saying that I did anything wrong, but I've had some FHA appraisals before, contracts before, that you best believe I had every light on and I had the door unlocked, and I made it really easy for that appraiser to get in and get out and not spend a whole lot of time looking around for things that might need requirements. So I think that is another benefit to you showing up and being present at the appraisal appointment. Any questions when it comes to why it's important as a listing agent to make sure that you're at the appraisal appointment? Note again, it is one of those things that they're going to call you and they're going to call your admin and say, hey, I can just swing by on Tuesday. Is that okay? And often you do need to just say, I really would prefer to be there in person. I'm happy to make it easy and stay out of the way, kind of a thing. So don't be afraid to do so. It is important. Okay. Moving on to day of an appointment or of the appraisal appointment. I often did give them a window because a lot of times appraisers don't like meeting agents because they have to talk to people. And sometimes appraisers are of personalities where they really prefer to not be social with other folks necessarily. I mean, they're numbers people. And one of the biggest reasons, guys, is they may have had an appraisal in Olathe that day, another one in Lee Summit, and now they're supposed to meet you in Parkville. And maybe when they went to the house in Olathe, it went faster, and now they're getting to Lee Summit and it went faster. Well, they thought they weren't going to be to you until 1. Well, now they're ready to come to Parkville, and they could be there at 12:15. And so it's so much easier if they can just say, hey, I'm going to be there between 12 and 1 or 12 and 1:30 and kind of come and go as they please. And that's why I would always offer, and sometimes the appraisals at the last place take longer, right? So for them to hit something right on the head makes it a little more difficult. So I often would try to be flexible with them to say, hey, if you want to just give me a call when you're 20 minutes out, I'm 20 minutes away from the property, and I'll just be kind of ready to go to meet you over there so that we don't have to like nail it right on the head for you, right? And that was a way for me to make sure that I was working with them and being helpful so that they weren't getting, bogged down in their schedule to where they're sitting around for 45 minutes waiting for me to unlock the door. Okay. So actual appointment, I encourage you to show up early if you can, but go in, unlock the front door, turn on all of the lights, just like it was a showing. And then I would say when they come in the door, I often would have my appraisal packet, depending on the appraisers. And again, as you do it more and more, and especially if you work in specific areas, you get to know the appraisers. Some of them didn't want my packet until the very end. Some of them I would greet them at the door and we would talk about the packet. But more than anything, they cannot have people in their photos for the appraisal. So it will mess up their photo if you are in the photos. So typically I would say, I've got all the lights on. Don't worry about turning them off. I'll take care of that when you're done. And then I would just stay out of the way. So if they're going in the kitchen to do photos, I made sure to tuck, out of the way to where there was no way I was going to be in the way of their photos so that they could really get through there quickly. And again, it's you're making their job easier and building a relationship with that appraiser. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the packet. And I do have examples of this. This is what my appraisal packet would look like. And so I was very, very purposeful in how I put it together, guys. These are paper clips at the top. I had little flags that I put on the side. And on those little flags, I said list of improvements, comps, copy of the contract. My paper clips were purposeful and in some ways too, because it made it look formal. I did not staple anything. Do not staple anything, because if they need to scan it in, that means they have to take the staple out. And then it might be getting jammed in their little at-home scanner thing. So I never ever stapled anything. But I did use a paper clip to paper clip the cover letter on. And then the next page behind the cover letter was the list of improvements. And we'll go through this. Right? So it was just a single page with that little flag on it. The next page was a one-page print of the MLS for the property, that subject property that we are doing the appraisal for. The next page, paper clipped together, are a list of all the comps with that little flag that said comps. And then finally, paper clipped together was a copy of the contract with a flag on it. All paper clipped together, so it looks really nicely put together, but it makes it super easy if they need to scan anything. And pretty inexpensive to put together, guys, right? So, okay, let's go through what each of these things are and why and how they're important. So I'm going to share my screen. Please feel free to speak up if you've got any questions that I can help answer. To start, this is the appraisal cover letter, and it is one that I used for years and years and years. And those appraisers that worked with me were used to this template. And I've shared it with many of you. I will more than happy have Kendall send out the template. Basically, just had my logo and the logo of the brokerage at the top, just to dress it up and make it more formal. I put the street address of the property that we were appraising here at the top. And then the letter itself said to who it might concern. I've included a copy of the contract for your records in the event the bank has not yet provided you one. I sincerely thank you for accepting our comparables to support the contract sales price for our listing at 4753 Hayes Street. My goal is to show you how we arrived at our list price, thus how we defend the contract sales price. These comparable properties are within 1 mile of the subject property and sold within the last 1 year. This home was on the market for just a day and a half. In that time, the sellers had 33 showing requests and received 7 offers, 5 of which were above asking price. If having a copy of any of these other offers will be helpful, please let me know. I'm happy to provide you copies of them. If there is any additional information that would help in the process, please let me know. Thank you so much for your hard work. I appreciate all the extra hoops that appraisers have to jump through these days. Please don't hesitate to call me with any questions. Have a great rest of your week. And then sincerely, and I legit printed out and signed it. So let's talk a little bit about this the letter. Some of the pieces that you may very well change, and what's important is that your comps are within 1 mile, because that's typically what an appraiser is going to want to do, is within 1 mile of the property and sold within 1 year. Now, if you have comps that you were able to pull for your appraiser packet that were within half a mile and within the last 90 days, update that in this letter to say these are all within half a mile in the last 90 days. Note that anything you give the appraiser, they are supposed to include in the file. This is incredibly helpful, as the next paragraph is too. And so many times appraisers were so very grateful when I would include this home had 33 showings, we had 7 offers, because they can put that in their notes and it helps them justify why it went so high, why it sold for so much. I often would offer do you want copies of any of those other offers? And they'd always say, no, that's not necessary, but this is very helpful. Also, why it's helpful for you to really track and gather that information, that data, when you're receiving your multiple offers, to keep track of exactly how many you had and how many were above asking and kind of a thing. I was asked the other day, what happens if I don't have multiple offers? Then you just don't include this paragraph about the multiple offers. I wouldn't include, we had 15 showings and got 1 offer. I would just leave the paragraph out, and that's just fine. The only time we include this paragraph is if it's to our benefit. Okay, any questions on the appraisal letter? All right. The next part of the appraisal packet would be list of improvements. So some homes, we all know, we're stretching to be able to make those feature cards, or we're stretching to be able to come up with maybe there haven't been a whole lot of improvements in the last 9 years. And yet other houses, we have a ton. So the times that I had a ton of them, I would try to organize them in some kind of a rational organization, whether it be outside, exterior, and interior kind of groupings. But I did try to, or I would put the things that are going to affect the value of the appraisal higher and prioritize those in the list. But the things that are important here on an appraisal is you do not include any dollar amount on the list of improvements. So if you include a dollar amount, then from what I have been told by appraisers, they are not able to include that in their packet, apparently. So it's important that you're including those things without any dollar amount with them. Often things are improvements, so renovations that have happened. If there are a patio and a deck, that's important, a fence. All of those things that you see on the appraisal that typically is going to give a property extra value are the things you're going to want to list out there, right? All new interior paint, all new exterior paint. I mean, you can go over the top with it. New roof, furnace and AC kind of a thing that they're not going to be able to see with their own eyes walking through. All right, so that's list of improvements. Next thing in the packet would be comps. Let's see, I can do this, guys. There we go. Okay. Again, I would always print out just the 1-page MLS print of the property, just so that they had that at their fingertips for whether it's square footage or just information on it. And it was just also nice to have something else in the packet that wasn't, I mean, I did try to include more than just the comps. So kind of lessen the blow of I'm not trying to tell you how to do your job. I'm just being helpful. Okay. So I often would include that. And then the comps. So when picking out your comps to give to an appraiser, again, within 1 mile, sold within the last 1 year. And they are going to want to, and they're going to prefer to use a comp that is closer in time than further out, unless those comps that are like within like 9 months out are exact same floor plan, same neighborhood, right? They may very well go to those. You do want to stick to similar floor plans. So we're not going to, on a ranch property that we sold, give 2 stories that are, you know, greater value, because you want to try to do as similar of a floor plan as possible. So split levels with split levels, 2 stories with 2 stories, 1.5 stories with 1.5 stories, kind of a thing. Condition 2, though, guys, doesn't necessarily have to match up perfectly. And the rules that when talking to appraisers are, they do have to give one property that is smaller in square footage than the subject property. And they call it the subject property is the property that you've sold. That is the house that they're appraising. So the subject property, they need one that is smaller than the subject property that they can adjust up, and one that is bigger. And they call it bracketing, because they want to show that they can take that bigger property and make adjustments down to your property. And they make adjustments to say, well, this bigger property had another bedroom, so we're going to subtract some money from the price that one sold for this appraisal in the middle. Note that condition doesn't necessarily, you do want to try to find stuff that is as similar in condition as possible. But if you've got a smaller house that is 100% updated and your house is not really so updated, you can go off of that. But I often too, this is a time that I live for my MLS carts, because I would go out and go back to my listings comps that we use to list the property, and I would include some of those. And then I also would go, and if I needed to, especially when I set records in neighborhoods, I would go find those ones that are going to be able to adjust and show that, like, no, we sold high, but we sold within the right range, kind of a thing. Any questions? I know comps are kind of one of those things where if you're putting together an appraisal and you're like, I'm not quite so sure, definitely know that you do need to include one that's less and not as nice or smaller than yours, and then one that is bigger and better, and then the rest can kind of be pretty even. But if you don't have those two, like, an appraiser's always going to have those on theirs. Sometimes they did include pending properties, and I know appraisers these days are using pending properties more than they used to because of the way our market is. So that is something, but typically I did try to have at least 3 that were sold and closed. The other thing when it comes to comps, if you are aware of any off-market sales, anything that happened outside the MLS because it was a for sale by owner or anything of that sort, I would include that information under the comp section and speak verbally to the appraiser of, hey, I know that the house 1 block over, very similar floor plan, it sold for sale by owner for X amount. Let me know if you need additional information about that. I did include the address and the information under the comp section of the packet. All right, I should probably pause for a second, guys, and see if we've got questions. No? Okay. Any questions on comps? Okay, and again, with the comps, a lot of times I did not like make a big deal out of it if it was an appraiser that seemed like they knew what they were doing. And I would hand them the packet and say, oh, I just put this together. It's something that I like to do as a service to my clients, but I went ahead and pulled some comps to kind of support where we were contract price wise and such. So I've included those if that's helpful. Guys, the time where the gentleman said is like the 4th one that I've done. I'm really new. He was very grateful. There's been many a times where people were like, oh, thank you. I mean, there's some appraisers that are like, thank you so much. And it's like, oh, you did my job for me. Like, I'm going to go run and use these. And there's other appraisers that are going to go, okay, I appreciate it. Like, and that information about all the contracts, that you got, that would be great. That's helpful. But that's all, feedback that you're getting to be able to go take to your client. And the times, like I said, that the guy had trouble finding the place, or it was his 4th appraisal that he'd ever done, were the times that I just made sure to really talk about the neighborhood, to talk about the property. And I was really grateful that I had those comps in hand. And the times that an appraiser said, Elizabeth, tell me more about how you think this house is worth $360,000. I could then say, well, so this one over, 2 blocks over sold for, $385. It had a finished basement, but it is smaller square footage, or it has 1 less, full bath. And it was really nice that I could at my fingertips say, Yeah, and then this one here and kind of walk through, and I had that opportunity to walk through some of that when they asked. If they're not asking, guys, you're not shoving it down their throat. But if they're saying, I'm struggling, where are you getting the 360 from, kind of a thing. Okay. Finally, the last section or the last piece of this appraisal packet was always a copy of the contract. And this might sound silly. And we all typically, guys, if you're new in the business too, the contract is going to go to the lender. The buyer's agent is responsible for sending it to the lender. And then the lender is supposed to upload it through the portal or send it to the appraiser. So really, the appraiser should have gotten the contract from the lender. There are many times, guys, I would show up and an appraiser would say, oh man, it's been a crazy week. I haven't gotten the contract yet. And I would say, oh great, I have a copy of it right here. And again, they would be so grateful. And they'd say, oh my gosh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So that's one reason that it's super important to include it, even though it's more paper. And guys, you get tons of black and white copies for free here, guys. So there's no cost to you to include a printout of the contract. The other reason, and this is probably one of the most important reasons to include a copy of the contract, I don't have control over that buyer's agent. And not all agents out there are trained as well as you guys are. Sometimes they don't put the contract in the proper order. And I was very specific in how I wanted my contracts ordered. Counteroffer goes on top. It's not sent over in multiple. There's one PDF that is sent to the lender and to the title company. And that one PDF, even if it meant printing everything out and scanning it, but that one PDF always had the counteroffer on top. And then the sales contract, and then all of the addendums. The reason this is so important, and some of you that are experienced have ran into this, I've ran into it before and I kicked myself and never ever let it happen again. A buyer's agent sent over the sales contract on top. The counteroffer was randomly somewhere in the rest of the contract and the rest of the PDF. The appraiser went out and the appraisers went out and looked at was busy, going fast. And they're looking at the sales contract and they go, okay, cool. So it looks like I just need to appraise this one for 212. They do their work. They send it in because that counteroffer is really hidden in the back. Lender might have missed it as well. And it comes back and it's appraised for 215. Appraiser thinks I supported contract value, right? And lender's going, it's supposed to appraise for 221. Well, to get an appraiser to go back and change an appraisal value and to show that like they weren't just trying to make numbers work is not easy. And that's a time where it's like, oh shoot, because the appraiser didn't realize he was supposed to appraise it for 221. He thought he only had to appraise it for 212. And it has happened, guys. It happens where then everybody's scrambling and everyone's going, oh my gosh, like how, like what the heck? Like 221 is a contract price. How did we miss that? Like, how did he miss this? So by having it printed out and giving them a copy of the contract, it's clear that on the top, it's supposed to be appraised for 221. The other piece about it, sometimes if they don't have a copy of the contract yet, and part of you being there is to say conventional appraisal, right? That's what you got us down for today. Okay, great. Or FHA appraisal today, right? That's what we, contracts got it as an FHA, right? And sometimes before appraisers have been, oh shoot, you know what? I didn't have a copy of the contract yet. I didn't realize it was an FHA appraisal. Let me go get my ladder so I can get a picture of the attic because I have to do that for an appraisal on an FHA. Or let me make sure the water's running while I'm here. And you're saving yourself another trip. You're saving the appraiser another trip because there's things that they have to do differently for an FHA than for a conventional. Okay. So hopefully that saves somebody from under a property under appraising just by having the contract in the right order. And as buyer's agents, always put your counteroffer on top. Finally, if there's anything that I would always keep amendments as well. So if you've done your inspections and resolution, and there was a change after the inspections to the contract price or closing cost, bring that amendment and provide it to the appraiser every single time, because I can just about guarantee that it hasn't made it to them from the lender yet. So and the reason that it would be important is if it increased the price, that's important. So they know they need to appraise it for more, but also their appraisal has to be reflecting correctly the purchase price and seller paid closing cost. Otherwise, if they submit it to the lender and there was a change of where the sellers are paying 2,000 of the buyer's closing costs because there's some electrical work. If the appraiser submits it without that, then the lender has to review it, and then they have to say, well, it doesn't have the 2,000 in closing costs, got to send it back to the appraiser. And we all know that they're busy, and there's times where there's days of delay that can happen because of that before you're hearing, yep, we got the thumbs up on the appraisal or not. So it's you kind of making sure too to help that happen as quick as possible so there's not a revision. And again, an appraiser is going to be incredibly grateful for you bringing a copy of that amendment to them so that they can scan it in and they can get done with the appraisal and send it off and be done in one swoop.
So do
Yeah.
those go on top under the counter, or?
I would put it on top of I would almost make it separate, Emily.
Okay.
So I would almost say, here's a copy of the contract. And then also I put in there on top, like paper. I mean, that's where your paper clips, like invest in paper clips, people. But that's where your paper clips could come in handy too, to where you're like, here's the contract. And then also, if you haven't gotten this amendment yet, I want to make sure you saw this.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
yeah,
And I would specifically call that amendment out to say, hey, by the way, you got a copy of the contract? Yes. Okay, cool. And did you get this amendment yet? And speak that out loud to them.
so like separate flag, separate.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. That is a lot of so that is pretty much a lot of the appointment, right? So the rest of it is, there are some appraisers that do not like to be social. There are other appraisers that might be a little lonely and enjoy the interaction with other people. So I often tried to book a little time in my appointments to where I could hang out and chat, because some of them are chatty, and I'm more than happy to chat with you, just because, again, I'm not trying to do any funny business to get a house to appraise for more than it needs to appraise for, but I'm building a relationship, right? And just like running into other agents is not uncommon, running into the same appraiser over and over again is not uncommon. And you're building relationships for the long term of your career. There's times where appraisers will reach out to you and they'll say, I see you have a pending sale, Elizabeth. What did you actually, do you mind sharing what you actually sold that one on Wyandotte for? And you're doing, like, that's again where you're building a relationship and they know kind of who you are. So that is what I have as far as the appraisal appointment. Obviously, if something comes in under appraisal, that is a different process for trying to go get a reconsideration of value. And that's probably a good one for Tanner to cover with you guys on how you do that. I could tell you how you go find comps and such, but that's what I have for the appraisal appointment. Any questions online, guys? Excellent. All right. Is everybody this is great. I'm gonna do this for Miss Kendall real quick. I can do it. My Snagit used to be better. Excellent. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I will have Kendall send out this cover letter. And I hope you guys have great appraisals that come in above sales price. One other thing is, as the listing agent, as the buyer's agent, when that appraisal comes in, note you only have to go back to the listing agent and tell them appraisal came in and it supports contract price. You do not have to tell them how much. So if the contract is for $360 and the appraiser comes in and appraises it for $365, your response to the listing agent is, woohoo, great news. Appraisal's in. No requirements, meaning there's not anything that anyone needs to do to the property. No requirements, and the appraised value supports the sales price. And often they'll say, well, what did it appraise for? Yeah, it supports sales price, and you are more than welcome to just leave it at it supports sales price, because sometimes it will cause ruffling of feathers if the sellers find out that it appraised for 5,000 or 10,000 more. Not that we're running into that a ton, but there will be times where you'll be tickled pink. You did a really, really good job selling a house, helping a buyer buy a house, and that appraisal is going to come in $22,000 higher than sales price, and your clients are going to love you, and you're going to look like a rock star. But just note that I would not be sharing that, and you are not required to share that with the listing agent. Just no requirements and support sales price. The only time you share the actual value is if it doesn't appraise. So as a listing agent, You never want to know what it appraised for. You just want to hear that it supports sales price. All right, guys, for real this time, have a great day. We appreciate you. Thanks so much.